Welcome to FilmoraPro, a new way to power up your storytelling. In this video, we'll be going over FilmoraPro's precise color correction tools, how to use scopes, and how you can put together an awesome color grade. Before you start, a good thing to note is that you can get a really good layout by going to View, Workspaces, Color. This will give you an optimal setup that you can further customize when doing color correction or color grading. While you can use similar tools for both, color correction and color grading are two distinct steps. Let's start with color correction. FilmoraPro comes with a lot of precise ways to correct your color. In color correction, the goal is to make the footage look like it was exposed and color balanced correctly. This can be necessary when you're shooting in flat color profiles, if you need to correct your white balance, or if something in the color just doesn't look right. For example, let's take this baking shot. What I'm seeing here is that the white balance seems to be way too blue, and the shot is missing a lot of contrast. FilmoraPro comes with some fast ways to fix this footage. For example, if we want to fix the contrast in our shot, we can hit the plus icon, go down to color correction, and click on auto contrast. This is great, but now I can really notice that the color in the footage doesn't look right. Let's grab a color temperature effect under color correction and drag the slider to warm things up. Now that does look a little bit better, but I'm not too happy with those really saturated yellow highlights in the top left. The thing with color correction is, sometimes the order in which you place your effects can change how things look in the end. Let's drag our color temperature effects before our auto contrast. And now things look a lot better. Let's look at another clip. This clip looks like it was shot with a flat color profile. We'll need to add some contrast and saturation into this clip. Another way we can add contrast is by using the curves effect. Let's add contrast by making a bit of an S shape in our curve. And that looks pretty good. Next, let's add some saturation by adding the hue, saturation, and lightness effect. Under master, let's drag the saturation up a bit. What we've done up to this point is a great way to color correct when you're in a hurry to fix up your footage, but FilmoraPro comes with some tools called scopes that can help you fine-tune your color correction. If we open the Scopes tab, we can see all these different scopes laid out. We can also change how these scopes are laid out by clicking these icons. In these next sections, we'll go over how these scopes work and how they can help you with your color correction. The histogram will probably be the most familiar scope to people who work with DSLR cameras, as most of these cameras come with a histogram built in. The histogram is a chart that shows how many pixels of different brightness values are on an image. Going from left to right, we have our darkest values going to our brightest values. At the beginning of this clip, we can barely see anything on the histogram, just this spike of black on the far left, which makes sense since our frame is filled with mostly black. However, if we move forward where the fireworks go off, you'll see that there's now a spike on the far right, which is this really bright line on our shot. We also have a lot more gray, which is the glow happening around the fireworks. Like the histogram, the waveform monitor is a way to chart the brightness values of an image. However, the waveform gives us a little more context of where in the image the different brightness values are. In this view, the left to right on the graph represents left to right on the frame, and up and down represents the different luma values. You can see this by looking at how the waveform reacts when we move the frame left and right, and how it reacts when we move it up and down. It's a little counterintuitive at first, but after working with it for a while, you'll get used to it. We can see that this broken white line around the top is our brightness values for the sky on the left and right of this bridge. Right now it's the brightest thing in this image, but it's only standing in the 70 to 80 area. If we want this image to look more correct, we'll need to move this line closer to 100. We can do this with the curves effect. Let's grab the top right corner of the curve and pull it to the left. As we're doing that, we'll see the entire waveform stretching upwards. The parade view is very similar to the waveform, but it separates the brightness values into red, green, and blue channels, which gives you a little more color information. While my sky is close to 100, it seems to be a little lower in the red channel, which gives it a slightly cyan look. If we want our sky to look more white, we can correct this by going back to our curves and in the drop-down menu select red. Now we can adjust the red channel the same way until it looks like our blue and green channels in the parade. While the previous scopes mentioned are mainly focused on brightness information, the Vectorscope is way more about the color in your image. The Vectorscope is laid out like a color wheel, with the center of the circle representing the whites and grays, while the edges represent the very saturated colors. The dots of light represent the color values in the image. If we're having trouble seeing the dots, we can hit this gear icon and bring up the brightness. Right now on the Vectorscope, we can see that there's a lot of cyan in this image, which is the water in our frame. We've got some neutral grays, which are from the surfboard, and some bright red and skin tones from the surfer. A really useful way to do color correction is to color correct based on skin tones. In the upper left corner of the Vectorscope, we can see this diagonal line. This is often referred to as the skin tone line because most skin tones fall somewhere around that line. In this clip, I can tell something is off with the subject's skin tones. We'll want to first isolate the skin tones in this clip by either zooming in and positioning the skin tones to fill the frame, or by adding a couple letterbox effects. Now, what I'm seeing in the Vectorscope is that we're not terribly off, but the skin tones are definitely a little too green. We can correct this by nudging it into the magenta direction. Let's add a YUV color correction effect, and you'll see we have 3 different color wheels. The top one is for highlights, the middle one is for midtones, and the bottom one is for shadows. For each of these wheels, we can change the color balance, the brightness, and the saturation. Since our skin tones are lingering around the midtones, let's drag this midtone wheel towards magenta, just a tiny bit. Right about there. Let's reset our clip's transform properties so that we can see the whole thing. And I think this image looks a lot better now. Finally, let's tweak the brightness and saturation of the highlights, midtones, and shadows to get the right look. Here's before and after. Once an image has been properly color corrected, you can begin color grading your image to help give it a certain mood or cinematic feel. For example, let's give this frame the popular teal and orange look used in a lot of films. The idea is that we want to get a lot of teal out of the water areas and more orange in the highlights in the sky and in the skin tones. How you can pull this look off is totally dependent on the footage you're working with, but in this example, we'll start with the YUV color correction effect. Let's drag our highlight slider into the orange a bit, and the shadow slider more towards the teal blue area. I feel like we're getting there, but there's just not enough orange in this image to work with. Let's drag a color temperature effect in, and we'll put it before, meaning we'll put it above our YUV color correction effect. And let's warm up this image a bit. There we go. And let's go back and make a couple changes here and there. You know, it's all about fine tuning and improvising as you go. There's a lot of color in the highlights and shadows now, so I don't want to be increasing the saturation there, but what we can do instead is go to our midtones and increase the saturation there by dragging this little slider up. Now this is pretty good, but I feel like we can push it even further by making the blues more teal looking and pull more orange out of the sky. Let's add a hue, saturation, and lightness effect and open the yellow heading. Let's bring down the hue so that the yellow parts of our image are slightly more orange and increase the saturation on those yellow values. Next, let's go down to our blue and we'll bring down the hue shift so that the blue areas of our image look a little bit more teal. For our next part, let's do something a little out of the box. Our scene feels a lot more like it takes place at sunset, and I really like this sunset vibe we're going for. Let's really capture that feeling by going to Lights and Flares and grab Anamorphic Lens Flare. So this effect has a lot of different options, but let's start by going to our streak and set it to horizontal. And let's set our alignment to left, and let's uncheck the vertical pivot. Next, we want to make this flare a lot more orange. So under Colorize, let's choose a nice orange and set the amount to 1. Right now, I feel like our flare is a little too weak. The anamorphic flare is affected by brightness values in the image. If we bring up the threshold, it means only the really bright things in the image will affect the flare. And if we bring it down, more parts of the image in general will affect that flare. Let's move our threshold around 0.5, 0.6 area, and our intensity to 3. I like what the flare has done with our image, but I feel like it's overexposed our sky a little bit too much. Let's top this whole grade off with a vignette. And we'll drag our vignette down a little bit so we really darken the area around the clouds. Now, this doesn't look right. It just looks like we're darkening over an overexposed image, which is not really what we're going for. In this case, the trick is to take this effect and drag it so that it's before all of the other effects. Now we have a nice amount of flare, but we also have more detail in the sky again. And I think we're all done here. Let's look at our grade before and after. This color grading took us a little while. If we want to use this set of effects in the future, we can save what we have here as a preset by selecting all of them, right-clicking and hitting Create Preset. Now when we go to our effects panel, we'll have a preset that we can drag onto other clips. We can even export it as a shareable preset file by right-clicking the preset and selecting Export Presets. The term LUT is short for lookup table. A LUT is basically a document that takes the colors and brightness values of your image and converts them into new ones. In a way, it's kind of like a color grading preset. The main difference is that there are already a ton of LUTs available all over the internet, and using them is extremely simple. Currently, FilmoraPro supports .cube LUT files. Let's try one out. I've got this really cool LUT file that I want to use on this image. To apply a LUT, go to your effects and under color grading, find the LUT effect. Next, in your LUT effect, click this folder icon so you can browse for your LUT file. I've got my really cool LUT file right over here. You can easily do a quick A/B comparison by turning your LUT effect on and off, and you can easily copy and paste your LUT into different clips to save time. So that's a look at FilmoraPro's advanced color correction and color grading tools. Now you should be familiar with FilmoraPro's large library of color effects, how to work with scopes, and how to create presets and import LUTs. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more tutorials on how you can take your editing to the next level. There's no limit to what you can make.